Welcome to Sharp Sharp. This is Wednesday, the 10th of June. We're recording this, and tomorrow is Thursday, the first day of the World Cup, and South Africa is playing against Mexico in the curtain raiser. Welcome to Zukile Majova from Scrolla and me, Rob Rose from Currency, and we have a special guest today, Patrick Smith from Africa Confidential. Guys, welcome to the podcast.
I'm very excited, Rob, about Bafana Bafana's game. Very excited.
How's it going to go, Zuks? I mean, is South Africa going to win?
Well, we should have beaten them in 2010 in the opening game. We must now beat them at home. And they seem to love Bafana Bafana. We've got a lot of friends there. The Mexicans, they seem to think we are their friends. You know, I think we need to beat them. I would think 2-1.
I think compared to America, we might be Mexico's friends. Well, in our show today, we're primarily going to focus on an issue raised this week by President Cyril Ramaphosa. He gave a very an unprecedented speech on Sunday night where he appeared live on television, and he basically said that South Africans are not xenophobic. This is obviously responding to the pressures from anti-immigrant groups such as March on March and a few others that have talked about how they want to have a big protest at the end of this month. So in his television speech, he said, there's 17 new measures to tighten borders, fine companies that hire undocumented immigrants. And he said no other person is allowed to confront someone in the streets to demand proof of nationality. He essentially asserted South Africa's right to handle this crisis, which is interesting given the fact that government has been absolutely absent in this. And he also said, we know that South Africans are not xenophobic, as there's no space for xenophobia, racism, sexism, Afrophobia, or any other form of intolerance. Now, I mean, I don't know how true that is. I mean, we've got data from the Human Sciences Research Council, which said the number of people last year who felt that they were willing to welcome all immigrants had dropped radically from 26% 5 years ago to 15% last year. And at the same time, the group who says that they welcome no immigrants rose from 30% to 42%. I mean, that's escalating towards half. Now, that is some sort of peak hostility for South Africans towards foreigners, and I don't know if Ramaphosa can actually say South Africans are not xenophobic. Zuks, perhaps we can start with you on this. What are your thoughts on that?
Rob, look, as we are talking about this matter, I kept wondering, is it really a Sunday family meeting matter? Because, those family meetings were called during COVID, etc. We seem to be calling a lot of them this time around, and I'm beginning to suspect this is a diversion, For instance, if we're not talking about xenophobia and illegal immigration, what would we be talking about as a country? We'll probably be talking about impeachment. We'll probably have people in the streets saying, this president has done this and this and this, and now the court has said this and this and this. So we'll be talking about impeachment.
Okay.
Are you hearing people in the streets now talking about impeachment? No. People are talking about illegal immigration.
Immigration
this is an effective diversion for me.
So that does that equate essentially our immigration issue to Donald Trump's Iran, essentially? I mean, a diversion from Jeffrey Epstein. Are we saying that that's what it is?
It's quite effective as a diversion. But let me give you my story, Rob. I come from Mount Frere in the Eastern Cape. There was a time when the women in my village were complaining about the quality of food from the local shop, that the bread was not fresh, the cabbage was not fresh, and all of that. And Ethiopians across from the village across were providing fresh stuff. They actually had a bakery coming through delivering bread every morning. And they were negotiating prices with the locals. The local, our shop owner refused to negotiate. He said, no, you're not happy, go and open your own business. And the people called a meeting and said, it's high time we have a shop. And an Ethiopian guy was invited, and he came through. When he came through, there was a discussion about whether he gets a site for the business and all of that. And everybody said, no, this person is not from here. He needs to be inside someone's house so that he's safe. If anybody who's naughty tries to go and break into that house, it's actually somebody's property. You wouldn't break into somebody's property if you live in the village. We've got very strong punishments in my village, like you could be fined a sheep or a goat. We don't mess around.
Not again. I keep getting fined sheep.
We don't mess around. So Rob, when someone is talking and saying South Africans are xenophobic, I refuse to accept that, because the Ethiopians have been living in our homes, in our villages for 30 years, for 20, 30 years. And we have not been, I mean, if you are xenophobic, you definitely say these people are not welcomed here, and we've been living with them. They've not been staying in hotels or anywhere else. They are living in our communities, but obviously now there are a number of issues. For me, there's a massive failure of government in South Africa, and everybody is looking for someone to blame.
So that's interesting. I mean, the fact is, at that HSRC survey we were talking about, the fact is that the number of people who said that immigrants aren't welcome has gone up massively to 42%. So if you say South Africans are not xenophobic and you relate the experience of your village, then how does that equate to that? I mean, how do you reconcile the two? What is that 42%? Is that something else entirely? Is that kind of a frustration about government inaction? What is that? What does that reflect?
Rob, we have close to 1 million college graduates who are unemployed in South Africa. And the only explanation that they keep getting every single day is that immigrants are taking entry-level jobs in the hospitality industry. I worked at Holiday Inn in Durban 6 to midnight when I was a student. A lot of people worked at Spare. It was funny, people used to go and write an exam to work at Spare, but students were making money during those days. So the entire hospitality industry used to be seen as an entry point. Construction jobs, entry point jobs. People are being told that you are unemployed because these people are taking your job. And I'm on the record, like, having worked 4 years in the hospitality industry. I know that the Zimbabweans are streets ahead of us in terms of service, in terms of their tolerance, in terms of how they handle professional businesses. I mean, you actually learn from these guys, So Rob, I'm not surprised that people are now blaming these guys, because the government keeps saying these are the guys who are taking your jobs. ActionSA says these are the guys who are taking your jobs.
That's not governments. That's parties. That's the Patriotic Alliance. That's groups like March and March who absolutely going to make hay about this and completely boost the kind of imagined, offense to the society of foreigners. I mean, that isn't what the government's saying.
Well, the president told the marchers and everybody else that their grievances are genuine, and that's the first thing that he did. When you're stamping authority, I felt he was too lenient when it came to that. When you say that everything you are saying is genuine, we understand it and all of that, it's a problem.
So, Julius Malema, the leader of the EFF this week, he talked about the fact that 300 Ghanaians left. They left partly in response to the kind of wave of xenophobia and the xenophobic threats. And Malema asked afterwards, now that these guys are gone, how many jobs have been created? I mean, what he's saying essentially is, you say that these foreigners are taking our jobs, but actually this isn't true at all. And I think that is the impression that it's not true at all, that they're being utterly scapegoated. But it doesn't help that government has completely failed to provide the services. So it's easy to say when you can't provide hospital services, oh, it's the fault of the foreigners coming and flooding our hospitals. But that is deflecting the issue from the government ineptitude that has created this problem. Is that essentially what you're saying?
That's definitely what's happening, Rob. I mean, there's less blame now on the ANC than there should be, because everybody should be saying, you have not delivered. I've got sewage running down the streets. It's not the foreigners who are causing that. It's ANC municipalities that are not delivering. So again, the ANC is happy. They are not being blamed too much. Someone else is taking the blame. Like I'm saying, it's a defection. It's local government election year, Rob. We should be talking about local government, and you are not.
Just one last thing before we bring Patrick in, because I want to ask about the sense of this on the continent. But Zuks, you mentioned something earlier on, which is essentially that Ramaphosa gave this speech because, in a sense, he was cornered into it by the ANC, that there are certain elements within the party that are quite right-wing, that demand greater scapegoating of foreigners. I mean, to what extent was this about asserting your leadership on the continent and saying, well, South Africa's not a xenophobic nation? And to what extent was this the ANC making a pre-election, I suppose, statement on immigration to kind of win back people who might have defected to the Patriotic Alliance and others who are very against foreigners?
Look, Rob, I mean, from the ANC point of view, it has been starting to look like it's getting out of hand. There have been people who are complaining that groups that present themselves as Zulus were targeting even Shangans, even Venda, even Tsonga people. This is an old thing. I mean, I studied in KZN. There have been a little bit of conflicts between ourselves and the Zulu people, and we are the same people, Wanguni people. But when we are together, you start having those sort of uncomfortable conversations. So there have been issues like that, and the president had to exert some kind of authority. He's correct to say that South Africans are not xenophobic. This is like saying, Rob, just because we had apartheid, it means all the whites during the apartheid years were racist. When we know that people were actively campaigning against apartheid, and a lot of on the record.
Is this not a mixed message? I mean, you're essentially saying we are not xenophobic, but then you're saying we're going to crack down on companies that employ foreigners and essentially validating some of those concerns. I mean, like you mentioned earlier, there is a sense that the government has validated the concerns of people who say it's all immigrants' fault. It's definitely seems to be a mixed message.
Yeah, for me, that's why I'm saying that statement by the president was strong in terms of authority, but it was also weak by accepting the claims that the people in the streets are making. It shouldn't have done that. Obviously it's law. But the government has failed to implement the law. Look at the porous borders that we have. It's been 30 years. There's been no plan to actually do any management there. We've got BMA now, Border Management Authority, but people are still pouring in through. Buses are coming in through with dozens and dozens of people who don't have proper papers in the bus. And you're like, how did you go through the border? That tells you you've got problems, you've got corruption. You've got corruption at Home Affairs, you've got corruption in the police, And effectively, my argument, Rob, is that these much organizers are actually sort of challenging the state in implementing, in sort of policing as well. That's where you got problems. First, people are clearly walking away from the ANC. There is no doubt about it. Election results are showing that people are walking away from the ANC. But where are they walking to? So you've got this huge vacuum, and these organizations are taking advantage of that.
Patrick, thank you so much for being on the show. It's fantastic when you're on. I feel like it lifts the tone and makes me feel less stupid, which is
no. I mean, I have to rival your jokes, which might be a struggle, but I'm going to try.
No, it's not a joke. I honestly feel stupid. It's I mean, I don't think I'm over exaggerating that either. But Patrick, I wanted to ask, the sense outside South Africa, I suppose, on the continent, is that South Africa does have a xenophobia problem. I mean, what are your thoughts on how the country is perceived outside the country, and is there this huge wariness across Africa that you certainly see in the communities within South Africa?
I think it's clearly been a public relations disaster for South Africa, and on top of that, you've got all this social media stuff going out, and God knows to what extent it's being coordinated. There are a lot of foreign actors being accused of putting stuff out to create division within South Africa, ramping up the xenophobia stuff. And certainly, I mean, some of the social media stuff that people are watching in West Africa, I'm told that there's video of people being stripped and beaten, in some cases killed. A lot of it is fake. So I think South Africa was very slow to respond to that and to meet the genuine concerns. And they, I don't think it would have cost Ramaphosa and certainly, the foreign minister much to bring in representatives of the various African communities in South Africa to a meeting to try and send out some positive messages. I mean, what you were saying about the wag the dog factor here, the way that governments are using, the South African government particularly, has been using the migration issue, trying to divert attention from Balafala and impeachment and so on. It's very much the modus operandi across Europe and the Americas. You see that the migration issue was weaponized in the Brexit debate 10 years ago in Britain. It succeeded in working to persuade enough Brits vote to pull out of the EU. So incredibly powerful meme, and I think the South Africans haven't done enough to counter that. But last thing I would say on the way it was received, talking to friends in West Africa and saying, well, would it help if South African envoys turned up in capitals like Accra and Abuja and said, look, really sorry, but you've misinterpreted it. This is not that. It's not that you're unwelcome. And they said, listen, our message to Ramaphosa is simply sort it out. You've got border restrictions and so on. Impose them, but impose them and enforce them fairly. And that's not happening right now. So I think that the one last thing I would say also, it doesn't fit in very well with all this rhetoric about the African Continental Free Trade Area. And one of the most common criticisms of participating countries is there's free movement of capital up to a point. There's no free movement of people. It's very difficult. It's harder for a West African citizen to visit a country in East and Southern Africa than a European. And that's clearly a major contradiction when you're talking about trying to build a single market.
I mean, it's also true to some extent. I mean, you talked about Brexit in the UK, for example, but it's not as if African countries and their politicians haven't learned the tactic of scapegoating foreigners for the economic woes either. I mean, Patrick, as you mentioned, 100%. Nigeria, Ghana, they've all got a history of doing this at some point.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back, and there's a sort of tit for tat thing going on in West Africa. In the Busia government in '69 in Ghana, they kicked about 500,000 Nigerians out. They said, either regularize your status or get residence permits or leave. And 500,000 were expelled. Then in 1983, under the Shehu Shigari government in Nigeria, the president just announced illegal West African migrants are sabotaging our economy. They must leave. And between 2 to 3 million were expelled within two weeks. I was actually covering the story then for Associated Press, going down to the docks. It was unbelievable. But I mean, another part of that story was those people who were expelled were warmly received by their own communities. And it wasn't the disaster that many people had been predicting. So it says something about the sort of community solidarity. You can move that many people around Africa, and it doesn't create the same sort of political uproar you would get, for example, in Europe. So there's sort of two messages there, I think, about just how flexible communities are in dealing with mass movements of people.
I mean, I can't imagine, 3 million people is a huge amount. I mean, seeing that happen in sort of real time must have been incredible.
It was, and the message, I think, 1.5, 2 million went to Ghana, and Ghana was in pretty dire economic straits at the same time, but they were taken in within extended families and so on. Who knows? I mean, that was 40 years ago, so I don't know how easy it would be to do that today. But I think there still is. When you look at the number of refugees in places like Tanzania, Guinea, for example, you've seen that acceptance. So I think it's not a single story. It's many, many different facets, extremely complicated. But I think part of it is this sort of global ethno-nationalist sentiment that is being flashed around, helped by social media, and instrumentalized by a lot of governments, whether they're African governments, European, American governments. And the voices to counter it are not really strong enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it does, you mentioned economic sabotage and Zuks. I mean, that's the point, is the economy has been incredibly weak in South Africa, which has allowed this moment to rise. And I think what Patrick mentioned about the kind of the global ethno-nationalist sentiment, it absolutely means that this is the time when this kind of level of intolerance is acceptable to so many people.
Rob, I worry that things can get worse, because the people who are actually going to leave or sort of volunteer to leave are actually going to be the skilled immigrants. It's not going to be the people who are selling drugs in the corner in Hillbrow. My teacher, Mr. Adai, was my maths teacher. He came from Ghana and has been in the country for over 40 years. Right through the Eastern Cape, the maths teachers during my time were people from Ghana teaching maths and science, etc. You can tell that these people were recruited at a point where there was a massive a shortage of maths and science teachers. We are actually going through the same thing right now in the country. There is a massive a shortage of science and maths teachers. And even if you look at the skills that the economy has, while we are celebrating graduates all the time in South Africa, the skills that are coming through are not good for the economy. They are not being absorbed by the economy. So you risk losing immigrants who are actually skilled for an economy that was actually built by immigrants, like Johannesburg was built by immigrants. We stand to lose a big deal.
I mean, it's staggering. If everyone with skills leaves, you'll just be left with podcasters and journalists. I mean, what's left?
Imagine that.
That'd be a very good podcast, though.
We'll do just 6 podcasters and that's it in the country. But Patrick, I wanted to ask, the governments in Africa seem, like you mentioned, I mean, they seem too late to respond. I mean, they certainly aren't doing their bit to kind of preemptively deal with this. You know, the SADC foreign ministers met urgently 2 weeks ago, and as happens in urgent meetings, nothing came out of it. I mean, I suppose that silence tells you something about the kind of quality and the state of continental leadership on an issue like this.
Well, I think there's some underlying economic factors as well. You know, there are 3 million Zimbabweans in South Africa, for not because they dig the climate. They're there for economic reasons, and in a sense, I think the Zimbabwe government actually doesn't mind that, as long as they're troublemakers, as they see it, out of the country, and most importantly, remitting a lot of money, earning, running around, running businesses, operating as entrepreneurs in South Africa, remitting those funds back to Zimbabwe. It's helped to keep the Zimbabwe economy together. And I mean, that was going back to, Mbeki, what Mbeki was trying to do in Zimbabwe years and years ago, because he was making the point that the Zimbabwe political crisis was sending all these people into South Africa, and it was going to build up into a crisis at some point, and there was going to be a lot of scapegoating. I think that's part of what's happened. So I guess on one level, the Mnangagwa government made some noises about, oh, this is terrible, the way our people are being treated in South Africa. On another level, they're quite happy with the status quo, because it's a safety valve for them politically, also represents some sort of revenue, at least some way of keeping the economy afloat when they're mismanaging it.
Absolutely. I mean, Zimbabwe is a case in point. I mean, the remittances are huge, but also South Africa wouldn't have a lot of the anger towards illegal foreigners were it not for what has happened in Zimbabwe. And like you say, the policy of quiet diplomacy, Mbeki's policy, failed dismally, and I think we're dealing with the consequence of that 20 years later.
Yeah, I mean, he was right to sound the warning alarms, but the diagnosis and the policy response was completely wrong. I mean, it's festered, since then, as we can see.
So, I wanted to ask, I mean, how does this end? We have the government trying to seize control of the situation. It doesn't seem to have the authority to do it. To some extent, I imagine people kind of ignore what Ramaphosa says at the moment. Ideas such as sending Ronald Lamola, the foreign minister, to individual countries, I just don't know if they would actually deal with the problem. I mean, how do you see this ending?
First of all, from diplomatically, we've become quite weak. There's been a lot of juniorization of the government. I don't see how Ronald Lamola on his own can really go across the continent or anywhere else on the planet and be a voice of authority on South Africa. Probably they would have to put together a team with some really senior ANC people to help him pass that kind of message. I know that Ghana wants to have the matter discussed at African Union level as well. So that's taking it up a notch. But on the ground, Rob, I'm excited when I look at KZN, for instance, at how the people of KZN have always had Mozambicans living just across the fence with them. Some Mozambicans are even earning the grant in South Africa and moving over. It's a whole thing. The story is written along the Manguzi border and all of that. The Basotho people have always lived with us. In my village, we've got Basotho people who are very good at looking after cattle and all of that. They get jobs right across the Eastern Cape. They are also very good horsemen. We've got horses and all of that. So from that perspective of people genuinely working, Rob, they come in, they work, and they leave. Zimbabweans, before they became a lot of millions of them, they would come to South Africa, and every Christmas they go home, and they come back, they work, etc. Very similar to me, being 1,000 kilometers away from home. I come to Johannesburg, and I'm not interested in being a Joburger. I go back home. This has to continue. This relationship has to continue, Rob. I see a lot of vehicles with Botswana number plates in Johannesburg. I see a lot of people from Gaborone really enjoying the Joburg lifestyle, etc. That has to continue, Rob. We can't lose trade, Rob, over this noise. But politically, Rob, I see further fragmentation of political parties. These new things that are coming up now as civic organizations are going to turn into political parties, or will be absorbed by parties like the MK party, for instance, in KZN. You can just imagine if March and March becomes part of the MK party in KZN, you will have problems, Rob.
Well, I suppose we have this day of reckoning on the 30th of this month, when they're promised to be protests against illegal immigration in South Africa. So we'll see how that works out. I mean, I don't know if Ramaphosa's attempt to kind of seize the mantle and deal with this preemptively will work. I suppose it's just watching that and seeing how this plays out.
Something funny about that, Rob. The leader of the Zulu warriors, Phakela Mthatha, he says he hasn't called a march on the 30th of June. He announced last November the date 30th of June, but he hasn't called a march. So you've got all these marches that are happening, and that's the other dimension in this thing, that you now have people using cultural groups and sort of organized with the cultural groups, but it's getting out of hand with other people. That's why the Zulu King was saying that not everybody who's there are part of Amabutu. They can account for Amabutu and their behavior, but they won't be able to account for everybody else.
Okay, well, on to something else to wrap up the podcast. Patrick, the World Cup starts tomorrow, and are you going to be watching South Africa play Mexico?
Definitely. I've put all my money on South Africa. I hope I haven't made the wrong decision. Not that I have much money.
You think so? What do you reckon the score is going to be?
Look, I'm actually hoping that we win 2-1, because I wanted us to win in 2010 when we were playing against them, and I had a feeling that we could have won. That Chabalala goal was amazing, So we can beat them at home, which would even be nicer, But I wouldn't put much stock on Bafana Bafana. That's me personally.
Mexico's 14th in the world and South Africa's 60th. So if we do happen to win, it'll be a massive coup for us. Patrick, and your thoughts on who could take the whole tournament? I mean, is England got a chance?
Well, as you say, everyone's got a chance. It's the biggest World Cup ever, so a lot more teams have qualified. I think, but it's well down the rankings. Now, I think France is well up there. I spent quite a bit of time in the country, so I should say that for my French friends. And they're on a bit of a roll at the moment. Our good friends at Arsenal were pipped by Paris Saint-Germain the other week for the European Cup. So, so the French players are on a roll at the moment. So I think they're certainly up there. And Macron is firing them up before he leaves the presidency. So he wants to go out and play. So yeah, I think I would put some money, if the money that remains that I went on South Africa, any remaining money would go on France to win.
Yeah, when the French are not fighting among themselves, they can really, really be dangerous. Even in rugby, they are unpredictable. That is when they're not fighting among themselves.
Patrick, does football kind of unite Africa? We've been talking a lot about the divisions between individual countries and the tensions between it. But if one football team, I remember 2010, when Senegal, for example, does really well, it does tend to unite people. I think is that a fair statement?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting, because there are people who say that the boundaries in Africa are totally fake. The 54 boundaries mainly imposed in Congress of Berlin, totally irrelevant. And the time when you see national sentiment, genuine national sentiment, is for national football teams, whether it's Nigeria, South Africa, Ghana, whatever. But then what is really interesting is when one of those teams, like, as you mentioned, Senegal, played Kenya, I think it was 2002, and beat, so Senegal played France in the World Cup and beat them. I mean, the place was alive. The same thing when Cameroon beat Argentina in 90. I mean, it was everyone, it was everyone's a Cameroonian that day on the continent. So I think it does have the capacity, definitely. I mean, I guess the rider here is the other issue is just this is going to be an incredible political World Cup. I've heard someone compare it to the, perhaps with some exaggeration, but the 1934 World Cup in Italy under Benito Mussolini. You've had unprecedented scrutiny of players coming in. A lot of people thought that African teams weren't going to be able to get into the States. The big fuss about the Congolese team, and the Senegal team was given a lot of grief at the airport, and the Somali referee was banned for no apparent reason. Yeah.
Well, I suppose that indicates what we need to do then, if we want to deal with the xenophobia issue, Zuks, then is just get everyone, Operation Dadula and March Against March, to go and watch a Senegal match against America. Is that our solution?
It's funny, Rob, in 2010, when Bafana Bafana was knocked out, we all supported Ghana until Suarez had to undo all our wishes and knock Ghanaians out. And today, the Ghanaians are being taken out of South Africa in a very painful way.
Well, thank you so much. That's Sharp for today. Remember to subscribe to this podcast, and importantly, subscribe to Africa Confidential, subscribe to Currency News and Scrolla, and join us again next week when we'll do the post-match analysis of what happened in this World Cup.
Sharp.